Hello, this is the WEED Art and Education Program. Welcome to all of you zooming in from California and other parts of the world. We welcome you to WEED Art and Education number 10 to spotlight the work of Cynthia Brannvall. Sidling up to Botany, Ecology, and Geology as artist and art historian. WEED, who's giving the presentation, Women Eco Artist Dialogue, was founded in 1996 and is a volunteer-run collective of female-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersection of art and ecological issues and social justice. I'm Mary White, one of the co-chairs, joined by our WEED administrator, Manoush Zomoradinia, who's the co-chair, and other WEED board members. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And if you wish, please add your location and land acknowledgement in the chat. WEED's office sits in the territory of the Huichen, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chichonio-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, who are researching and revitalizing and preserving Ramaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Villages of Lejean and Socorate Land Trust, who are working to return native land back to indigenous stewardship. And it's just happened in Berkeley on 2 occasions in the last couple of months. A little Zoom housekeeping. We're recording this presentation, and please keep your audio muted during the presentation. The hosts may mute you if there's extra noise. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat or the questions section. We will stop the first recording after Cynthia's presentation and immediately start a second recording for the questions and answers, so the chat will stay. Now I'd like to introduce Cynthia. She is an art historian and a multimedia artist who teaches art history as a full-time faculty member at Foothill Community College. She is a California native of African-American and Swedish descent. Cynthia has an undergraduate degree in art practice and art history from UC Berkeley, where she was a Phi Beta Kappa and a Ronald E. McNair Scholar, and was awarded the departmental citation for her research in art history. She has an MA in art history from San Francisco State University with an emphasis on modern and contemporary art. An advocate and ally for social justice and equity, Cynthia's artwork explores identity formation envisioned in an imagined deep time terrain of memory, reclamation, and the geographies of forced and voluntary migrations of body and spirit. Her artworks have been selected for juried show exhibitions in the San Francisco Bay Area, San Luis Obispo, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C. Cynthia was selected for the 2022-23 Emerging Artist Program at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, where she had her first solo exhibit, March 29th through June 12th of 2022. Cynthia has published short essays for exhibition catalogs, has juried the Wild Side exhibition at Art Gallery in San Francisco, and for an online exhibition of NIAD. Cynthia is currently making new work during a 4-year studio residency award at the Cumberly, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Art Studios program in Palo Alto, California. So we're just very pleased to have Cynthia here in the midst of finals week, probably, or close to it. And no, but anyway.
We're on the quarter system. Foothills on
Oh, good. All right. Well, we're thrilled to have you here. Take it away, Cynthia. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be included in this program with just the caliber of women that are a part of this organization, and also your past speakers. So I'm so grateful that you invited me to do this. So let me screen share and kind of get this piece of it going. How does that look? Is it looking good? Okay.
Yes. Looks good.
So my talk today, what I really want to get at is sort of the theories that underpin both my artwork and my approach to teaching art history. So I'm not going to be presenting my artwork. It's going to be a meander. So I'm going to be meandering a bit because to get at the why and what led me to engage in these theories and apply it to my artwork and my teaching. So I'm going to be meandering a bit, just showing you glimpses of my undergrad and graduate research, and then also sort of talking about artworks where I can have, you know, sort of show you how I'm engaging in these different theories. So I'm going to start with this piece that's called Indigenousness. And I start here because it is a self-portrait. It's part of a series that I call Identity Mapping. And it's a self-portrait comprised of the maps from my own heritage. So maps of Africa, maps of Sweden, and maps of the United States. And sometimes in this series, not in this particular image, I have maps of California. But within those maps, I'm also using satellite mapping imagery, but I'm also using historical mapping. So you'll notice in the middle one, this is the US, but when it was Choctaw territory, or the parts, some of the maps I use to represent Africa are historical and have countries that no longer exist in Africa. And I'm playing around with scale. I print these on Gampi, which is a handmade Japanese paper, so that there's a transparency to them. So when I collage them together with beeswax, as you're sort of looking through these places, you might be in Luleå, Sweden, and then you might be in, you know, Texas, right? Because I have, you can see through the various maps. And so I start here just thinking about my own identity, starting with myself, because I think part of my engagement and interest has been being mixed race and having this longer history that I carry that has perspectives that are contradictory. So I have my father, you know, on my father's side, a history of forced migration through slavery. On my mother's side, voluntary migration from Sweden to this country. But, you know, and I was primarily raised by my grandmother. She was sort of the stable person in my upbringing, and she was born in 1908 and had her own racial bias simply from the time period that she was born in. And so I carry with me an identity that has histories that have a lot of contradictions. So I think that has something to do with my path. I started with this piece, California, and I made it when Trump got elected, and things seemed to be becoming even more polarized in the country. And I had this desire to cut California away from the United States and have it be its own continent. And so I doubled the map and made it into this beautiful vaginal shape, and thought how wonderful it would be for California to be its own continent. So I was thinking through, like, how do our places of origin sort of inform and map onto our identity. So I'm going to go back a little bit to my undergraduate research. Sorry, I'm just waking my other computer up. And so this is a neoclassical painting called The Oath of the Ancestors. And when I was at Berkeley, I was studying this with Professor Darcy Grimaldo Grigsby. And she discussed this painting as a neoclassical painting, which it is. The artist was of mixed race. His mother was a slave from Guadeloupe, and his father was a French colonial. And she talked about this piece that celebrates the Haitian Revolution. These are the fathers of the Haitian Revolution that stand on either side of this stele that kind of has the beginnings of their constitution. And so when I studied this, and it was never shown in Paris, even though it has all of the qualities of a neoclassical painting, it was never shown in Paris. It was in fact sort of smuggled to Haiti, to Saint-Domingue, which would become Haiti, and it is shown in the President's Suite. So when I saw this, I was thinking about the iconography and thinking about iconography as something that requires some sort of consensus. In other words, in order to understand Christian signs and symbols, it necessitates to some extent understanding those signs and symbols. And I thought it was curious that this would be shown in Haiti with all of this French classical academic iconography. And I wondered what it would have meant to the people who lived in Haiti where it was shown. This is just a slide showing this is the artist here who was largely assimilated into French society. This is Jean-Baptiste Bellet, who was also considered to be mixed race at that time because of his status in society. And this is sort of an alliance between those mulattoes or mixed race and Dessalines, who was understood as Black at the time. It's their alliance that enabled the Haitian Revolution. And what was curious to me was that when I looked at the structure of the painting, the bones of it, I could see this symbol on the right, the Veve Dambala Wedo, and that was the research proposal that I did. There were similarities, and I'll show you an image that makes that even more clear. And so I proposed it as a research project and investigated what a veve was, and made an argument that the bones of the painting actually had, let me back up a little bit, the bones of the painting could be understood through a lens from the people of Haiti as containing this veve, which is the veve of the ancestors. What is a veve? A veve is sort of a signature of a loa, or of a type of gods or collective energies that can be brought into people to this idea of parallel worlds, right? Where through the act of possession that they can bring in ancestral energy to get information and guidance. And it has to do with sort of an African fundamental belief that there's the world of the living and the world of the spirit, and that energies continue to evolve in the spirit world, starting with memories and then evolving to kind of like, archetypes is a good way to think of it. And that there can be at these crossroads interaction and communication between the spirit world and the world of the living. And all countries that received African slaves have diasporic religions where they tried to reconstitute their belief systems, which were very diverse, right? Africa is not a monolith, but along certain themes. And here's just a glimpse of a variety of these signatures of various energies and loas that can be called in through rituals. So this is what I was seeing in the painting, right? The twin road where the energy could come down, and sort of the what was thought of as the contrapposto stance, sort of mimicking this these snake forms that are really energy coming down through and possessing the body. So this was the research that I did. So I think when I was doing this research, I was really trying to think of multiple perspectives. What is a perspective of this painting that is not based, that is not Eurocentric, for example? And then in that journey of trying to write a thesis and a paper and do research about a people who were enslaved and oppressed was challenging. It required learning to read against the grain. It required a lot of sort of theories that at the time as an undergraduate, I did my best. And one of the things I was doing is along this idea of hierarchy. And so this is one of the theories. I was doing this without knowing consciously that I was doing this, but I came upon this theory later, which is because in order for me to make the argument, I had to make an argument of how would the people of Haiti, or this artist whose mother was from Guadeloupe, how could information have traveled from different Caribbean islands? And so I was using this idea of hierarchy as where you sort of shift your perspective from a land base to the sea. And by doing that, different histories and exchanges of information can happen in those sea routes. So hierarchy is a maritime theory, but it can also, as I've given you this definition here, it's used in the Atlantic world concerning political, economic, and social tensions on the docks and ports out at sea between the mid-16th century going into the 19th century. It was a way that attests to resistance, rebellious sailors, slaves, and other oppressed individuals who acted out against land powers of the central imperial government, like England and like France. So that was one of the interesting theories that I came to really engage with and started thinking. I think that was one of the first things that started to get me to think about identity in these fluid ways, right? And then also hierarchy is also applied sometimes to ecological systems in which the relationship between all components are looked at and in their complexity. And I want to just disclose that I'm not an expert in any of these theories. They are ways of understanding that, for me, I'm drawn to them because they have become ways of understanding identity and history in ways that are non-hierarchical and that are non-binary. So I was really searching out alternatives to sort of the main theories that we use to construct knowledge and to teach history. So that's part of playing with all of these maps and comprising my own sort of continents out of these maps that I have that inform my identity, thinking about the longer history. And I've done a variety of works. I think in total there are, I think 11 or 12 works within this series where I'm playing around with maps, overlapping them, putting photos from my family members. This one is of my daughter. The previous one was my father. This is a picture of my father in the 1860s. This is a picture of my daughter and another picture of my daughter, thinking about sort of these longer histories that we all carry with us. And a combination of the idea of a continent residing within us from places that have informed our identity. And then when in graduate school, I was also, I ended up writing my thesis on, I switched from sort of French Romantic art and emphasized, was really looking at identity politics, specifically Black artists in America. And I ended up writing my thesis on a collective called Spiral. And again, really looking for a theoretical framework that would allow me to really get into the complexities of this history of Black artists coming together and grappling with complex issues, and also trying to resist ideas of the monolith. And there's a whole history of them, I think, starting with the Harlem Renaissance, right? You have an established Black middle class in the northern states, and then you have, through the Great Migration, a lot of people coming from the South. And it's the combination of that intellectualism and sort of folk aesthetic that comes together that really speaks to the Harlem Renaissance aesthetic. And then there have been iterations since, Spiral being one of them. And I was trying to find a framework, a theoretical framework, where I could talk about this experience of Black collectives of artists in various points of their career and from very different places coming together and learning from one another and creating art in those contexts. So this is when I came upon this idea of rhizomatic theory that has been something that I still grapple with to understand, but it's something that I really, that is very meaningful to me. And the term rhizome comes from botany. And it's those kind of plants that have stems running underground, and they strike new roots out of their nodes, and they can lay sort of dormant until the ideal circumstances allow for them to emerge. And so it is a term from botany, and it describes, you know, a certain kind of phenomena with plant life. But it has been used as theory by a number of theorists. So Deleuze and Guattari use the term rhizome and rhizomatic to describe theory and research that allows for multiple non-hierarchical entry and exit points in data representation and interpretation. And I've sort of tried to apply that to history. You know, there's a canon to art history, and I've tried to have these on-ramps where marginalized perspectives can be included in the canon, be put back into conversation. And some of the non-botanical rhizome-like examples are the internet, jazz, a map, or even a virus. And then to engage with a rhizomatic framework is to give up this idea of, or attachment to beginnings and endings, to give up tops and bottoms, not this or that, but always and, an emphasis not on what is or what was, but on what it can become. So there's a transformational component that's really interesting to me. And the intensity of difference is really centered, actually. And here's a quote by Deleuze. He says, "In this model, culture spreads like the surface of a body of water, spreading towards available spaces or trickling downwards towards new spaces through fissures and gaps, eroding what is in its way. The surface can be interrupted and moved, but these disturbances leave no trace, as the water is charged with pressure and potential to always seek its equilibrium and thereby establish smooth space." Another thing functioning in my work is this idea of deep time, which refers to the time scale of geological events, which is vastly, almost unimaginably greater than the time scale of human lives and human plans. And it's one of geology's great gifts to the world's set of important ideas. It's also, I think, similar to indigenous notions that every person, each one of us, is representing 7 generations before us and 7 generations ahead of us. And so for me, this piece, deceptively small on this screen, each panel is 48 inches wide by 60, and it's a triptych called Continents. And they are representing the continents of my origin. So again, Africa, Sweden, and the United States of America. And I have painted on textiles onto these. They're quite large. The textiles are all vintage and antique textiles. Some of it is trim or handmade lace, but I also take apart clothing, so Victorian clothing, skirts and tops. And so I started really getting engaged with textiles as a medium because of all of the potential layers of meaning. I think that personally, I grew up in a family of women who sewed. And so I had this intimate relationship with sewing and textiles in my family. And just being a historian, I was always aware of the lack of women's perspectives in history. And so when I started using textiles, I would imagine women sitting in these circles as I did in my family and discussing the events of the day. And so I was interested in how this material evoked the presence of women, the work of women historically. And then I also felt that cotton could signify labor, it could signify slavery. And so I felt like was a material that could also hold all of those multiple perspectives, and that people could find various stories in here, all even with contradictions, right? Because a lot of these forms, the material themselves, they evoke sort of rites of passage, births and baptisms, weddings, funerals, graduations, those kinds of things. And so, so they just started becoming really rich with meaning for me. I started thinking of them as sort of almost DNA folds that passed through the bodies of ancestors and across continents throughout time, thinking of them as seeing this as like a landscape and a strata that started to evoke that much longer history. Yeah, so these are, as I just said, these panels represent the continents that comprise the deep time origins and migrations of my own ancestry. Like I shared in the beginning, one that has contradictions in the sense that one side of my family came here through forced migration, the other through voluntary migration. And so all of that could be entangled in this work. Here are just some details where you can see close up. They look like paintings at a distance, but there's actually no paint on them. There's just acrylic matte medium and then actual fabric. This is just a piece of my, a section of my artist statement. I think some of it was noted in the biography. And just again, how I'm trying to engage with these theories and create work that has this kind of fluency of the sea, this state of becoming, and sort of how do we carry the histories that we all carry in our identity. So another theorist that engages with rhizomatic theory is Glissant, and he's probably the one I lean on the most. He has a book called The Poetics of Relation that I am constantly going back to. And this is one of my favorite quotes where he says, one of the full senses of modernity is provided by the action of human cultures, identifying one another for their mutual transformation. And so I really love that. There's another scholar who teaches at Yale, Kobina Mercer, who talks about the entanglements of the world. And so when I'm teaching art history, I'm always trying to put the perspectives of marginalized identities back in conversation with the canon, because I think the canon is somewhat arbitrary, and I understand why it is what it is, but those histories were entangled with other histories. And so I'm always trying to get at that, both in my teaching and in my art practice. I want my students, when I'm teaching them the history of art, I want them to be able to see their story in this larger story of humanity that I'm teaching. So it informs my approach to teaching art history. And this is a piece that's also a really great example of this quote that I just showed you, where he talks about sort of this, how people are always in a state of becoming, right? That there's always this transformation occurring. This is a piece that I made called Rhizome. And these lace pieces were given to me by a friend who, and a collector of my artwork, who got these are handmade lace pieces from one of the daughters of the revolution. And I don't know if that daughter was from the Union side or the Confederacy, but for me, the idea that these Civil War era lace pieces somehow found their way to a Black artist in California through a series of relationships, right? Somebody made these and gave them to someone who then gave them to someone else, who gave them to someone else, and that they ended up in a Black woman's hands to make art out of. I think really is just a fascinating endeavor for me. And I sort of arranged it in a way to get at this notion of intersectionality, the interconnected nature of social categories such as race, class, and gender. And I particularly like this graphic of that when we think of our identity as not singular, but multiple, going again to this idea of multiplicities and hybridities, that we are actually able to find many more entry points to be able to build bridges and understanding and sharing our stories. So another piece that I made in textiles in 2020, the threads that divide, that bind a divided nation. And again, thinking about cotton, thinking about the United States, there's lots of flags in the history of art. I wanted to make one in my own visual language. And I purposefully kept the Mason-Dixon line as a visible gap between free states and slave states. This is so much of a fiction because I wanted all of the states in the piece. And at the time when the Mason-Dixon line was in existence, some had not become part of the United States yet. And it was an interesting piece for me to make. You can't really see it through Zoom, but maybe a little bit. But this is the first piece where I actually also included long stitches that go out of that connect the north and southern states, that go out of the frame. And that's sort of my acknowledgement and way of getting back at that entanglement, that even though we think of the southern states as where slavery occurred, the northern states were benefiting as well from slavery because they were providing, through banking, they were providing loans and crediting, and of course benefiting from the export of cottons. It was interesting too. I have not been to a lot of these states, so it was also interesting for me. Somebody asked me once, because people will look at this when it's being shown and they'll sort of, I find their state. And sometimes people will ask me about why I chose the textiles that I did for particular states. Sometimes I have, I've been to that state or I have a reason for the particular textile, but a lot of times I was working with the shape. And then honestly, a lot of these states are like stranger states to me. I'm fearful of them based on what I see happening politically. With the political maps and the political climate that we've had the last few years. So it was interesting to have this kind of intimate mark making with these different states and really looking at the shape of them. And I haven't spent a lot of time on the East Coast. I was amazed at all the teeny tiny odd shaped states there were on the East Coast. So even though I was working with a map, it was a really interesting experience for me to sort of represent it in a sense. And this is just a detail so that you can get a glimpse of sort of the what some of the states and how I was shaping them. And I've given you a quote from somebody who wrote about the solo show at MOAD. And she says, the textile paintings in the exhibition engaged in broader themes of diasporic experience. The threads that bind a divided nation is a textile painting of the US flag with a gap between the Mason-Dixon line and long stitches crisscrossing and connecting north, south, east, and west. Rendered in textiles, this US flag evokes the legacy of cotton is king and the fundamental gaping and unhealed wound of America. Here's another detail. I think this one you can see some of the long stitches. And then this is some of the work that I've done recently. Recently, I have been, and this is this is finished, but it's not photographed well. It's photographed by me, and I'm not a photographer. I usually get my work photographed by a professional. So recently, these are going to be like studio shots that I'm going to share with you of works in progress. This one's finished, but not framed. And so I've started engaging in Black textiles, black on black, black on white, white textiles on black backgrounds. And I'm really fascinated with the idea of horizons. This is what I've been working on this year. It's really been captivating to me. Horizons and what is unknowable and what is possible in the unknown. And also thinking about dark energy and dark matter and black holes and how black holes kind of emit these dynamic horizons that have information. And I've sort of been melding those concepts with the experience of being a Black person, the idea of slavery as a kind of a black hole in the sense that it continues to emit and inform these horizons. So still thinking through a lot of it. This is what it looks like, straightforward. And then also kind of looking at Hubble drawings, that kind of thing. So you can see this painting is also in progress. And I started looking at these images from the Hubble telescope, and then thinking about the gravitational pull and collision and using, creating a horizon that evokes some of that celestial collision, but rendering it in various skin colors. So trying to sort of map that into the work as well. And then these are also just more thinking about black holes and the horizons issuing forth from there. some other horizons, thinking about the churning of a horizon and, you know, just horizons in a variety of ways as being complex, churning, explosive, but at other times being sort of calm and serene and reflecting sort of parallel worlds or realities, that kind of thing. And then I'll circle back to older work that I made around 2016. Also thinking about, just to show you different materials that I also use. I do jump across mediums and materials. I sort of like I like entering into the unknown and then figuring out what I can say in a given material. So these are life masks made from my face and my daughter's face, which I think is a powerful combination, the sort of mother and child. And then on the faces, I have put various vives that I started out talking about from my undergraduate research. And then on some of them, this is my daughter's face. These are some of the names of African Americans that have been killed through police violence. And then this is the symbol from Shango from Santeria, a diasporic, African diasporic religion in Cuba. And this is from the veve that I showed you in the beginning on my face. And I was almost making these images almost like protective spells in a certain way, trying to, I don't know, coming from a place of worry, I think, as a parent, as a place of wanting to protect and feeling like the systems of justice and protection in the society that I live in fail people who look like me and our children. So sort of reaching out to other powers that may be. And then here's a close-up where I'm just showing you that I inscribed some of these, did some photo transfers on some of the masks of actual slaves onto the work. And I think, well, how much time do you have? I mean, I have so much work, and so I have 2 minutes. So I'll just touch on this a little bit, and then I will open it up for questions. So the other way that I engage in textiles is by creating making artifacts out of Victorian blouses through a process of putting them into encaustic and damar so that they capture the memory of wear, and then I paint them with resin. And I often, they look very ghostly. And these ones, I was thinking of Black suffragists. So I'm often naming these busts after specific African Americans who were activists and poets and writers and have done significant work that are often left out of the main stories of history. So I think I'll stop there and open it up for questions. That was a lot of talking. I usually stop and check in with people, but I would love to hear from you all and answer any questions that anybody has. Let me know if you want me to stop share.
Well, let's give her Cynthia, a round of applause. That was fantastic. I'm going to talk just for a moment, and then we'll start the question and answer series. WEED is a volunteer collective, Women Eco-Artist Dialogue, and we're in the midst of rebuilding and updating our artist directory. We have over 700 artists in our directory, and we're working on a redesign that will help make the search engine work better. So we'd be very grateful for any support on this vision by visiting the website and donating on our website on weedartist.org or sending a check. And we're also, as a volunteer organization, always looking for members who are interested in engaging in the process of producing the newsletter, or somebody who knows WordPress who wants to help post things on our website, and also somebody to reach out for membership. So we are very grateful for all the volunteers that are working with us, and we want to continue to expand our vision. So let's go back. Please put your questions in the chat or raise your hands by pressing the reaction button. So I think what we'll do right now